the adage is the bad actors have to find one hole, we on the other side have to find and plug all of the holes. Well, not necessarily true. If I know which window you're going to use to break into my house, I just have that one window to protect.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as other top CISOs and industry security leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Jason Taule, CISO in Residence, Maryland Innovation Center.
I'm a geek who loves puzzles. Back in grade school in the late 70s, I got in some trouble in math class. These were the days of open space, and mostly out of boredom, a few of us in the back of the class taught ourselves the rest of the book, and the teacher thought we were goofing off. She didn't believe us, but we passed the test. So they gave us the next level book and we passed that, and they were quickly running out of things to do with us. So somebody had the bright idea of giving us a computer. And in those days, that would have been a CPU and a card reader, no keyboard, no monitor. And we wanted to know how it worked. And that was all she wrote. And I've been hooked ever since.
Well, that's excellent. And so you've had a lot of different roles. What is it that you're working with now?
So I'm working with an incubator. There are 60 different resident startups, early stage startup companies in this incubator. And as you can imagine, they are focused on building their business, building their revenue streams, but they have risk and they don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal to sustain a full-time CISO. So I'm kind of a force multiplier. I'm a CISO for 60 different companies. Helping them fulfill what a full-time CISO would do. I think I'm a little more narrowly focused. I tend to be focusing on the needs that their customers and the asks that those customers have. Because if you think about it, all companies need two things to succeed: access to capital and access to customers. And in 2022, those are questions of confidence and trust. So what are their investors asking for? What are their customers asking for? And I'm helping them anticipate those questions and have good answers when those questions come up, so that we can dispense with the security vetting and let them get down to business.
So Jason, you wrote an excellent piece for the book, CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. And I love the title of it, Keeping Up with the Joneses When Your Neighbors Are Bad Actors. Could you tell us a little bit about what you were writing there?
There were a couple of things that I had in mind. Like you, I've been asked by boards and leadership teams that I've served, how are we doing? The question they're really trying to answer is, are we doing enough? And you could take the several different approaches to answering that question. One is, what are the threats that we're exposed to? Because the CISO has several different jobs, and one of them is to inform the conversation and make sure that our leadership understands those threats, those risks. It's perfectly acceptable for them to accept risks that they know about. It's not okay to accept a risk by default out of lack of awareness of its existence. And it's weird, though, that benchmarking is one of the ways that we understand what reasonable and appropriate means. We all have that language in many different regulations. And unfortunately, sometimes it means if the majority of your industry is doing it, you need to be doing it as well, or otherwise have a good answer for why you're not doing it. I don't always like that line of reasoning. As a parent or as a child myself back in the day, if I said to my parents, Billy's mom said it's okay to do something, the response, of course, I would get was, well, if Billy stuck his head in a fire, would you do the same thing? But unfortunately, sometimes that is an appropriate response. We do benchmark ourselves. We do want to know where we are standing in our industry. We don't want to outspend our competitors. We don't want to also be the easy target, because sometimes it's more about having an appropriate level of posture relative to the rest of the industry, so the bad actors don't pick us; they pick somebody that's a more of an easy target.
And
that was initially what that was about. Yeah.
How do you get good information on, what other companies are spending, or, what their security posture is, to be able to make that benchmark comparison?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that I do. First of all, I think most organizations, and certainly the ones that I've supported, we start with one of the industry frameworks. Boards have a challenge to know that they've asked the right questions of themselves when they're saying, how do we know that we're doing enough? How do we know that we've looked at the right things? Well, an individual CISO, no matter how smart and well-trained and experienced and battle-hardened he or she may be, still one individual. You've got organizations throughout the world, ISO, NIST, and other standards bodies that are filled with experts that define those frameworks. I'm not saying you have to do everything that they suggest, but by using those frameworks, it's pretty good assurances that you're at least looking at all the appropriate dimensions of the problem. That tells you what to look for. In terms of the answers, there's certainly threat intelligence sharing that's inappropriate. There are communities of practice. Most of the critical in the U.S., most of the critical infrastructure sectors that were formed after 9/11 have ISACs, information sharing centers. And there's also roundtables, a variety of types. There's the CIO and CISO type of roundtables where you're getting together and you're exchanging best practices with your peers. The acknowledgement is the bad actors collaborate, and if the so-called black hats are doing it, then by all means the white hats have to collaborate if we stand a chance of holding them at bay.
And I know that, like, some of the large consulting companies, when you engage them, they come in and they show you what you're like against the industry, because they're able to aggregate a lot of different information and then give that comparison to you. But without hiring those people to come in and give you those kind of comparisons, do you find that at these conferences or talking to other CISOs that you can get a pretty good idea of what the threats are in the industry?
If I do, again, I've been doing this like you for longer than I care to imagine. I've built up a pretty good network, and I have different folks that I go to for different things. Paying for the service is certainly one way to do it. I think part of the value that the big consulting firms bring is a little bit of letterhead. You're getting some credibility and defensibility. Sometimes it's not about having the right answer. It's about having the ability to defend the answer. But more realistically, I like to talk to the hands-on practical CISOs. What are they doing? There's a variety of different roundtables, both professional membership level and just informal groups. I'm very fortunate that I make my living in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States, and it's sometimes referred to as the Silicon Valley of cyber. With all of the various three-letter agencies, there's an abundance of smart people in the market who often are very willing to share with one another. So I can get a good sense of it that way.
Yeah, and through the Cybersecurity Collaborative and the Cybersecurity Collaboration forums, we share a lot of information, and it's a good way to pick up what those emerging threats are. But I like that you talked about, comparing against the peers is important, but really understanding the emerging threats is really paramount to your own program and your own industry.
Absolutely. So whether I'm supporting early stage startups or I'm a direct full-time CISO in an organization, the approach is fundamentally the same. Where are we? Where do we need to be? And then what's the appropriate way to close that gap in a way that's culturally attuned and fiscally prudent? Just because you're not doing something doesn't mean it's a risk. Just because the rest of your industry is doing it doesn't mean you have to. You have to look at for yourself based on the kinds of assets that you're trying to protect and the different threats that you're facing, whether that is indeed something that's likely to occur, the objective that the control was designed to meet. Is that bad outcome likely to occur? And if it were to occur, what its impact would be. And that's the approach that I take. So I'm talking to other folks to see not only what they think, because I don't want it simply to be my opinion about that risk. If I know that somebody else is seeing it, they're feeling the brunt of those attacks or those types of techniques, then I'm likely to be affected by it as well. If I'm in especially if I'm in a particular industry, and then what are they doing about it? That's where you can get good ideas for how to appropriately build a defense against those individual threats.
Yeah, I really liked what you had to say about that we can get a lot of information through the SIM and the SOC. But we're really looking in the rearview mirror, even when we're trying to look forward. And you took an approach where you started looking at the deep web to find the CVEs that tell us about that.
Well, I didn't initially set about that task. I was doing deep web research for another purpose, but I had kind of an epiphany that I wrote about in the book. I found a bad actor that was looking for exploit code to take advantage of a particular CVE. And certainly we all know that there are bad actors that often look to trade information with others. I'm looking to exploit this particular company. Does anybody have a way in? We've all seen that. Or I'm looking to get at this type of data, and they're looking for others that can help with that. This was the first time I saw somebody basically shopping by CVE number. So I immediately went back and looked at and talked to our network folks to see how we were faring against the patch that had come out against that particular vulnerability. And we were in pretty good shape, but there were a few instances where we hadn't fully patched it for one reason or another. And I kind of pushed the rest of the coverage to get us to 100% on an emergency basis. And then that following Monday is when WannaCry came out, taking advantage of that particular vulnerability. And the epiphany I had was, the adage is the bad actors have to find one hole, we on the other side have to find and plug all of the holes. Well, not necessarily true. If I know which window you're going to break into, you're going to use to break into my house, I just have that one window to protect. So I don't know that everybody has the wherewithal or the financial ability to spend time on the deep web doing that kind of research, but it does point to the place that threat hunting has within the overall toolbox of the CISO. Whether it's capabilities that you can build in-house or capabilities that you can engage through community or communities of practice, I really think you need to be looking at that. And vulnerability modeling in particular, especially for organizations that have substantial technical debt. Not everybody has, like you and I have been subject to customers who insisted on us having 100% vulnerability patch levels. And if you've got a substantial amount of ways for bad actors to come in and you can't patch them all, you need some means of strategically approaching that technical debt to get at the ones that are most likely to be exploited.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. So how does somebody go about starting up a threat hunting team? And what sort of resources does that take?
Yeah, so it takes a fair amount of resources. It's going to be a challenge. We all know that there's I don't know what the exact number is, but a global cybersecurity professional deficit of something like 3 million. And so you're going to have a challenge finding these people. The people that are capable of doing the kind of advanced threat hunting that we're talking about tend to be on the more advanced level of the spectrum in terms of the skills that they need. I think that this is actually, for a variety of reasons, one of the few services that makes sense to outsource. When you look at something like a SOC, their activities are much the same, and they can allocate those costs over 5-10 different companies. So there's economies to scale to be had there. I think the same thing's here with threat hunting. There's a couple of other interesting things that are also obstacles to building your own capability. One, very often, if you've spent time in the deep web, much of the useful information happens in a language that's different from English. If you don't have that ability to converse idiomatically in the slang of those other languages, you tend not to be trusted by the other parties, and therefore you have a very difficult time obtaining the kind of intelligence that you're looking for. And by the way, there's a separate degree of that. That's more threat intelligence hunting versus vulnerability and hole hunting. There's also the folks within your own environment that are specifically looking for people and presence and TTP. So that's a little different thing that you really can't outsource, but the other one you can. One other caution, if you are going to have any of your listeners exploring the deep web, they do want to engage legal. As I'm sure everybody knows, there is a lot of unsavory content on the deep and dark web. And if you come across it, you yourself, although your intentions may be altruistic, may expose yourself to some potential legal concerns, right? If I come across certain kind of content and I revisit that, now am I viewing that content? No, I have a different purpose. So make sure that you're doing it without exposing yourself to unintended risk in the process.
That's a really good point. I mean, you don't want your browsing history to be something that is leading down that path. And then, for people that want to just, let me go see what this deep web, dark web is about. Are there dangers with trying to connect to that and exposing your organization to higher risks by against some malware in your systems?
Absolutely. I think I've been very fortunate that I haven't really had such an experience, although I think we all believe it to be entirely possible. Sometimes an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So rather than do it from the corporate domain on an asset joined to that domain, I'll typically do it from a computer that is off network. It's not joined to the domain. And frankly, it has very little assets on it. And if it were to become completely compromised, I would have I would not suffer any substantial consequences. I could just reimage it and continue about my business. And obviously, you're going to use your Tor browsers and other things so that you're not divulging any information or limiting what you can divulge out in terms of who you are and how you're operating.
For organizations that are looking at vulnerability management and looking at the percentage of CVEs and that are critical that they mitigated, and are we getting kind of a false sense of security when we're looking at the percentage of those numbers, because there's these other things that are out there that we're unaware of that the attackers are looking at to penetrate our systems?
Sure. There's damn lies and statistics, right? And sometimes the numbers that we report in our dashboards or that we report in our management reports often mistakenly lead people to an erroneous conclusion. I think we've had several recent supply chain issues. Log4j is one that comes to mind. And when I say supply chain, I'm talking about the ubiquitous nature of the software that was found to be vulnerable. If you're a bad actor, I'm not necessarily going to look for something that only affects a small percentage of the technical footprint of the world. I want that big, great find. It's one thing if I'm trying to specifically target one organization, but if you think about Log4j and how many organizations were affected by that, that's a tremendous payoff for the person that discovers that vulnerability. So not all vulnerabilities have the same weight or potential impact, and looking at it straight as a percentage, what does it mean to say I'm 99% patched if the 1% that remains unpatched is a killer vulnerability like that could affect an entire supply chain? And I do want to talk about the supply chain issue. I had an organization that I work with on the Eastern Shore. They looked almost exclusively at their own operations. They had a downstream, this case, it was a refrigerated warehouse that they shipped product to for logistics purposes. And this company and others like them created the market for this downstream provider. They were then subject to ransomware and they shut down. And they didn't realize that in shutting their operations down, all of the logistics and the trucking companies that would ship product out downstream of them, they were halted because there was no product to go out. The upstream companies that I was working with had no ability to ship the product to the warehouse, which meant they also couldn't accumulate new inputs, and they couldn't, and everybody upstream of them, in this case, this is an agricultural scenario, they were basically all the contract farmers and everybody upstream of them couldn't sell to them. So this one disconnected downstream exploitation of a vulnerability caused the entire ecosystem to come to a halt. So it's also causing a rethink in people's mentality, because suddenly I have to cooperate with my competitors, or those I might think of as competitors, because we as an industry are all facing these kinds of challenges. And then the last point is the vulnerability percentage also is in what? So I think most of us tend to focus on the traditional IP stack. Well, with the Internet of Things and the Internet of Medical Things and the IOXT, organizations are increasingly, for all sorts of good reasons, putting all of these devices on the IP network that were never intended to be there, and exposing themselves to a number of possible risk exposures and vulnerability exploitations in the process. So it's not just in hardware and software. We also have to be looking at firmware, and it's in everything.
It goes back to knowing what you have and knowing how it's all being protected, doesn't it? And now we've extended this to the supply chain, and it just complicates all of our processes. Should larger companies be doing something to help these other people in the supply chain that may not have the resources themselves to mitigate these issues? Looking at that as a risk. I mean, would that be a cost benefit almost for a larger organization to maybe help some of those other organizations that are critical parts of their supply chain?
Yeah, I think I think it's entirely feasible, because it's the last qualification that you put on that sentence. It's that are critical parts of their supply chain. It would be wonderful if we exist in a world where everyone had enough resources to address all this. I think we mostly find that companies are struggling just to apply the necessary resources to secure their own operations. But if you look at it and understand that you have this critical dependency, and if you have a critical player that has less wherewithal, you do realize that it's often in your own best interest to help support them. So, for example, in the past, where I've worked as a CISO of federal government contractors, we often find it necessary to build teams where you have multiple parties and subcontractors coming together to form a solution for the customer. Some of the smaller companies may not have the wherewithal, may not have the capability, and sometimes it's not me funding them. It may simply be, I need your talent, I need your people, I need your capabilities. What I will do is I will give you a notebook that's configured and a part of my environment, so that you can inherit all of those security controls while doing the work as part of this team. So there are lots of ways to address that. Certainly the information sharing, but sometimes it's a little bit more than that as well.
Great idea. I really like that of giving them those capabilities. Well, this has been great, Jason. Any last things that you'd like to share with our CISO leaders, experienced, current, and emerging CISOs that they could benefit?
Yeah, I do have one last thought, and I think it's something that I've only come to fully appreciate working with smaller startup companies, having spent time with large multinationals. The CISO's job is typically thought of as one that's highly technical, and I'm not downplaying that part of our job. But in another sense, the CISO's job is really about making it as easy as possible for our customers, third parties, investors, and whomever else to do business with us, right? It's not that security is unimportant. It's that it's not germane to the business at hand. We don't want it slowing things down. The goal is to anticipate those questions and needs and demand for trust and show respect for those concerns, and then dispense with it, so that the two parties to the transaction can get together and talk about whatever it is that's the real business at hand. And I don't know that enough organizations do that. And the more we start thinking about it that way, that our job is really about business enablement, then the more the business will support it, the more all the parties in the chain will come together and adopt standards, so that we're not all asking one another to fill out individual one-off security questionnaires, because that really doesn't really help, solve the problem.
I think that's a great idea. I think it's, we need to put our no buttons away and figure out how we turn that into a yes to support our businesses, because they're obviously coming to us with a business need. Well, thanks, Jason. This has been wonderful to connect up with you again, and thanks for your contributions to the industry and to the CISO Compass book, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Visit more CISO Stories podcasts on securityweekly.com, where you will find an index to prior episodes. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.